The turbulence ended as abruptly as it began. Silence descended once more, thicker now, heavier, with unspoken tension. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else sipped their champagne. For a moment, it felt as if the clash mid-flight had shaken loose something inside the cabin. The air hung heavy with a question Catherine hadn't anticipated. It wasn't what they thought she was. They didn't know, and maybe she enjoyed the mystery. Maybe she reveled in the chaos they created, as they struggled to categorize her. It was an intoxicating sensation, being defined by the sum total of their assumptions rather than by herself. So Catherine smiled. Slowly, faintly, the corners of her mouth curving into a quiet amusement. Their perceptions were a puzzle she found oddly fascinating. They pieced together fragments of her life, her sweatshirt, her demeanor, her unassuming presence, and created narratives. They labeled her choices. They dissected her appearance. They categorized her interests, and none of it was true. Or maybe it was, but here was the beautiful part. Catherine Mitchell thrived on ambiguity. Clarity was overrated. Complexity was exciting. Being underestimated, priceless. So she played along. She savored the irony. It was delicious. They saw a woman in a penguin sweatshirt and they were right. They saw a humble traveler and they were wrong. They saw a simpleton and they couldn't be more inaccurate. Catherine Mitchell was exactly who they thought she was. And that was terrifying. Their world would crumble. Not because of revenge, nor rage, nor recognition. It would crumble because she didn't belong in their world. The ascent started smoothly, but within minutes, reality hit. The cabin lights flickered on. One by one, eyes snapping open, faces etched with alarm. The gentle hum of the engines morphed into a disconcerting drone. Luggage tumbled from overhead bins. Cries of panic mixed with mumbled reassurances. Catherine felt it too, a disconcerting drop in the pit of her stomach. But her reaction was different, calm. She watched as order descended into controlled chaos. Flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency. Pilots speaking in clipped tones. Passengers clinging to the faint hope of normality. But none of it touched Catherine deeply. She didn't cling to the armrests. She didn't clutch her chest. She did not succumb to the urge to flee the confines of the metal tube hurtling through the clouds. Her breath evened, steadied. She closed her eyes snapping open. Everyone looked different. Glossier, sharper, thinner, younger. Their faces swam before her, each bearing a unique brand of desperation. The rich businessman desperately dialing a number. The young couple holding each other close, as if trying to merge into one being. The grandmother clutching a rosary, whispering silent prayers. Catherine Mitchell recognized something in those eyes. Fear, the raw, primal instinct of self-preservation, mirrored in every soul. They were exposed, stripped bare of their everyday personas. They were just human, and Catherine felt a surge of empathy. But it was fleeting. This, she knew, was just the beginning. Turbulence exposed the raw core of things. But what happens when the veneer of civilization wears even thinner? The descent was rough, jolting them from their fear-induced stupor. The turbulence had been a test, a crucible in the sky. And as the plane lurched to a halt on the tarmac, a new energy crackled among the passengers. Adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a frantic desire to escape, to reclaim a sense of control over their lives. Suddenly, the cabin door slid open and a woman emerged. Not just any woman, but Catherine Mitchell, a beacon against the backdrop of frayed nerves. She rose from her seat, her movements fluid, graceful, a stark contrast to the urgency buzzing around her. Her steps were sure, her posture erect, radiating a quiet confidence that demanded attention. When she stepped off the plane, it was as if she walked through a keyhole into a world unseen. Her gaze, clear and steady, scanned the crowd beyond the threshold, searching, waiting. There was purpose in her stride, determination in her posture. She was a predator, sizing up her prey. The airport terminal loomed before them, a labyrinth of hurried travelers and indifferent staff. Each step Catherine took seemed to amplify her presence. She exuded an aura of authority, a quiet command that commanded respect. Even in the crush of humanity, Catherine Mitchell stood apart, and when she stopped, she did so with an air of quiet confidence. Her hands, slender yet strong, rested lightly on the suitcase at her feet. Her chin, tilted ever so slightly upwards, was a testament to her indomitable spirit. And her eyes, they were the windows to her soul, reflecting a resilience forged in the fires of adversity. Catherine waited, not impatiently, but with a patience born of understanding. She knew the power of stillness in a world that reveled in noise. And then she turned. The movement was almost imperceptible. A slight rotation of her shoulders, a tilt of her head. But in that instant, the entire terminal shifted. Those who had hurried past her now paused, their gazes drawn to her like moths to a flame. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to change. As Catherine walked away, heads turned, whispers started. Every fiber of their being screamed danger, their instincts urging them to steer clear. And they should have listened. For the woman who seemed so ordinary was anything but. The terror on their faces was palpable. But Catherine Mitchell didn't flinch. She kept walking, her pace leisurely, her senses alert. She reveled in the fear, the uncertainty they projected onto her. It was a heady elixir. The closer she got to the exit, the louder the whispers became. They spoke in hushed tones, their words laden with cautionary tales. Stay away from her. She's trouble you don't want. Don't cross her path. Their warnings echoed through the terminal, weaving a tapestry of fear. But Catherine paid them no heed. She was on a mission, driven by a force beyond their comprehension. She pushed through the parting crowd, leaving behind a maelstrom of anxiety and apprehension. As she stepped outside, the city welcomed her with open arms. Skyscrapers clawed at the sky, cars honked their symphony of impatience, and the air thrummed with the pulse of a million dreams. Catherine Mitchell stood tall amidst the urban sprawl, a queen surveying her domain. A sly smile played on her lips. The game was on, and she was ready to play. In the grand theatre of life, Catherine Mitchell was not merely an actress. She was the director, the playwright, the producer, and the star. She orchestrated her world with a finesse that bordered on artistry. The diner bustled with activity, a microcosm of urban life. Waiters weaved between tables, their voices blending with the sizzle of frying bacon and the murmur of conversations. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm shadows that danced on the checkered floor. But in the corner booth sat Catherine Mitchell, shrouded in an aura of quiet intensity. She didn't blend into the background. She dominated it. Her eyes, sharp as shards of glass, missed nothing. Her posture, ramrod straight, spoke of unwavering resolve, and her hands, resting on the table, betrayed a strength that belied her gentle demeanor. Across from her sat her companion. His name was Ethan Hayes, an enigma wrapped in a tailored suit. His face, handsome yet weathered, bore the scars of battles fought and won. He was a man of few words, his gaze intense, unwavering, a testament to a life lived on the edge. He, too, belonged in the shadows, thrived in the murky depths of society's underbelly. Together, they were an unlikely pair, two souls who found solace in the dissonance of the ordinary. But what drew them together was a bond forged in the fires of adversity, a shared understanding of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of it all. And as the city hummed its relentless tune, Catherine Mitchell and Ethan Hayes plotted their moves. They discussed business deals that could make or break empires, shady ventures that tiptoed on the edge of legality, and strategies that could shift the balance of power. Their conversation was a chess match, each move calculated, each countermove anticipated. They were players in a high-stakes game where the stakes weren't money or power, but survival. And as the evening deepened, the diner faded into a distant hum. The city lights twinkled outside, oblivious to the storm brewing in the corner booth. These four walls couldn't contain the plans, the schemes, the ambitions that soared within them. They were architects of chaos, builders of empires, and they were just getting started. The restaurant was a sanctuary of flavors and camaraderie, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy world that awaited them outside. The scent of spices danced in the air, mingling with the chatter of patrons and the clinking of silverware. It was the perfect setting for a reunion, a place where old bonds were fortified and new alliances were forged. Catherine and Ethan sat opposite each other, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight. They were an unlikely duo, she in her penguin sweatshirt, he in his tailored suit. But their differences were what made their partnership so formidable. Catherine's unorthodox attire was a statement, a challenge to a world that demanded conformity. And Ethan, well, he was a man who thrived in the shadows, a connoisseur of secrets. Together, they formed a formidable team, a force to be reckoned with. But the air was thick with more than just the aroma of spices. There was a palpable tension between them, a shared history. That he liked her. No, better than that, he respected her. Thought, no, better than that, adored her. Their love, the kind you read about in fairy tales. But life had a funny way of writing its own endings. So when his wife walked into the noisy, smoky bar, his gaze didn't follow. He was engrossed in something else. Some records tumbled from the shelf, scattering vinyl across the floor. Nothing unusual that happened all the time. His focus was entirely on the music, on the song he was mixing, on the turntables under his fingertips. But then she appeared before him, her silhouette framed in the doorway. The bell above tinkled. Melody faded into memory, and all that existed was the curve of her smile. Years later, in a crowded terminal, surrounded by important people, he would remember that moment, the clinking of whiskey glasses, the smugness of their voices, how they laughed at every cruel punchline. He watched them, mesmerized, as they discussed everything he'd achieved, everything he'd sacrificed, as if they owned the narrative of his life. He heard them say his name with the possessive familiarity of those who believed they knew him. And he saw her. She remained by the window, gazing out at the clouds that drifted like soft lies across the sky. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to rise, to shout, to shatter the glass walls that kept him from her. Then he felt her gaze upon him, unwavering and sure. And in that moment, he understood. She didn't need his name to be on their lips. She didn't need them to see her. She was everywhere and nowhere, depending on how deeply you chose to look. Robert Mitchell, one of them scoffed. Man's a walking PR stunt. Right place, right time. Totally overrated, another chimed in. One lucky break, and now, he's the poster boy of progress. He clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to defend himself, to set the record straight. But she rested a hand on his arm, her touch as grounding as soil after a storm. And in that instant, he knew that these men, who spoke with such certainty, had no idea what he had given up, what he'd survived. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the chemo clinics he funded quietly, the broken systems he challenged, even when it cost him everything, the battles no one photographed, and the victories he gave away without credit. They didn't see the man who held her hand when her father died, or the one who still made her tea with a post-it note that said for courage. They didn't see any of it. They mocked him like he was myth, and fantasized about meeting the woman behind him. The mysterious wife they always imagined was too refined to be real. Bet his wife's some sculpted socialite, one said. Silk dress, Prada heels, probably speaks 5 languages but only sips champagne. She let a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. They had no idea. She was sitting right here, in an oversized penguin sweatshirt, ponytail loose, heart steady. The woman they dreamed of meeting had just been dismissed by them moments ago. Not one of them knew her name. And yet every seat, every headline they admired, led back to her. She wasn't invisible. She was simply choosing not to be seen. Not yet. Because storms never interrupt. They arrive. A faint chime echoed through the first-class cabin. He glanced at his smartwatch. A new message. His brows lifted. Gentlemen, he said, straightening his tie. Seems I've been invited to meet Robert Mitchell. After landing, private reception, very exclusive. The others leaned in, their envy thinly disguised beneath laughter and congratulations. I told you that story about my biotech pitch would catch someone's ear. Walter beamed. Smart people recognize smart people. He sat a little taller, smoothed his jacket, practiced the confident half-smile he reserved for boardrooms and billionaires. In his mind, this was it, his big moment. The moment someone of power had finally seen him. But a few rows down, she turned slightly toward the window, a soft smile curling at the edge of her lips. Not mockery, not arrogance, just a quiet understanding of how wrong he was. Because it wasn't his words that triggered that invitation. It wasn't his stories, or his charm, or his polished bravado. The reception wasn't arranged because someone found him impressive. It was already planned. It had nothing to do with him. The invitation was extended by someone who had been sitting next to him all along, listening, watching, measuring silence against noise. He sipped his water slowly as the cabin lights dimmed. The clouds outside stretched like whispered secrets across the night. Walter rehearsed his introduction in his head. She thought about whether she'd even mention this moment to him, whether it was worth a story, or just another example of how loud men miss quiet truths. They both sat in silence, one inflated with imagined importance, the other resting in the power of what she already knew. And in a few hours, the reveal would begin, not with noise, but with names. The terminal lounge was bathed in sterile light. cold, clinical, corporate. Walter adjusted his collar. Trevor ran a hand through his hair. James double-checked his notes, imagining sound bites and small talk that might impress. "Stay sharp, gentlemen," Walter muttered. "This is Robert Mitchell we're talking about. One moment with him could change everything." They stood tall, smiling, ready to be seen. The sliding doors parted with a soft hush, and in walked Robert Mitchell, not with an entourage, not with theatrics, just calm presence, quiet authority, heads turned, phones discreetly lifted. The CEO, the man they depraised and belittled in equal measure, was now just steps away. But then, he walked straight past them, and smiled. Not at Walter, not at Trevor or James, at her. His face softened, his arms opened. "There you are," he said, voice warm and full of hidden joy. "I missed you." She stood, equally calm, equally poised, and embraced him. No hesitation, no performance, only quiet love, rooted in time. Walter blinked. Trevor looked confused. James tilted his head, as if his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. "Wait," Walter breathed. Robert turned toward them now, politely, like an afterthought. "Gentlemen," he nodded, "I hope the flight treated you well." His arm still around her shoulder. And then it hit them, hard and slow. The woman they had judged, dismissed, and mocked, was Catherine Mitchell, Robert's wife. The woman they'd fantasized about meeting. The one whose quiet they mistook for weakness. Walter's face drained of color. Trevor coughed awkwardly. James suddenly found interest in the floor tiles. And she simply smiled, graceful, still. The storm had passed, and they stood in the wreckage of their own arrogance. Silence can be brutal, especially when it follows arrogance. Walter stood stiff, hand extended, still believing there was redemption in charm, still hoping the warmth Robert gave Catherine would trickle his way. But the handshake never came. Instead, she turned, not with spite, not with triumph, but with a calm that pierced deeper than rage ever could. Her eyes met Walter's, cool, clear, direct. "Your watch is beautiful," she said softly. A pause, but it's 3 minutes fast. A polite smile, not a jab. A correction, but it landed like a bullet. Walter's finger tightened around the phone. His outstretched hand trembled, the gesture unanswered, hanging like unfinished business. Robert, composed and unmoved, gently guided her away. No explanation, no fanfare, just deliberate silence that spoke volumes. Behind them, Walter's phone buzzed. He glanced down, desperate for distraction, for rescue. But it wasn't rescue, it was the final blow. A notification flashed on screen. "Proposal rejected. Atlantic Skyways has declined your investment package. Thank you for your time." His fingers tightened around the phone. Trevor shifted uneasily. James muttered, This can't be right." But it was. Everything had shifted in minutes. Power had rearranged itself. The woman they thought irrelevant was the axis of everything. He looked up, but she was already gone, walking beside the man whose name they'd carelessly tossed around. She never raised her voice, never retaliated. She didn't have to, because the most devastating truths aren't shouted. They're spoken with grace and perfect timing. 3 minutes fast, and a lifetime behind.